Amelia, quick question. Are you ready for today's episode?
Haha, I was born ready. This topic makes me excited.
That sounds serious. Hello everyone, welcome back to Learning English Studio.
Hi everyone, I'm Amelia.
And I'm James.
Today's topic is simple but very powerful for your English.
Yes, but before we start, please subscribe, like, and share this podcast.
It really helps us keep making content for you.
Okay, Amelia, shall we start?
Yes, let's go. Today, we're going to talk about something that everyone loves, weekends, and more importantly, how to talk about your weekend in English. This is such a common conversation topic, and it's perfect for English learners to practice.
Absolutely. Think about how many times someone asks you, "How was your weekend?" on a Monday morning. It's probably one of the most common questions you'll hear in an English-speaking environment.
That's so true, James, and yet so many learners struggle to answer this simple question. They either give a very short answer like, "It was good," or they get stuck trying to find the right words.
Exactly. So today, we're going to give you all the tools you need to talk about your weekend confidently in English. We'll cover vocabulary, phrases, grammar, and even some cultural tips.
I love that. And we'll make it fun and practical with lots of examples that you can use right away. So let's start with the basics. When someone asks, "How was your weekend?" what are some simple ways to respond?
Good question. The simplest responses would be things like, "It was great," "It was good," "It was okay," or "It was relaxing." But you can also be more specific, like, "It was busy but fun," or "It was very relaxing."
Those are perfect. And after giving that initial response, it's good to add a little more detail, right? Like, "It was great. I went hiking with friends on Saturday."
Exactly. That's what makes a conversation interesting, adding those details. And I think it's helpful to know that in English-speaking cultures, when someone asks about your weekend, they usually expect a bit more than just "it was good."
That's such an important cultural point. In some cultures, a short answer is normal, but in English-speaking countries, people often share a bit more to build connection.
Absolutely. And it's a great opportunity to practice your English. So let's think about the different types of weekend activities people might do. We could categorize them to make it easier to remember.
Good idea. Let's start with relaxing activities. What are some things people do to relax on weekends?
Well, people might say, "I stayed home and relaxed. I watched movies. I read a book. I took a nap." Or, "I just chilled at home." That last one is more informal, but very common.
I love chilled at home. It sounds so natural. And what about social activities? Those are pretty common on weekends, right?
Oh, definitely. You might say, "I met up with friends. I went to a party. I had dinner with family. I visited my relatives." Or, "I went on a date."
Those are great examples. And what about active or outdoor activities? Many people like to get outside on weekends, especially if the weather is nice.
Absolutely. You could say, "I went for a hike. I played sports. I went to the beach. I had a picnic." Or, "I went cycling." Those are perfect.
And let's not forget about home-related activities. Weekends are often for catching up on things at home, aren't they?
Oh, definitely. You might say, "I did some cleaning. I did laundry. I worked in the garden. I fixed some things around the house," or "I organized my closet."
That's so true. And what about hobbies or learning activities? Many people use weekends to pursue their interests.
Good point. You could say, "I practiced guitar. I painted. I took a dance class. I studied for my exam." Or, "I went to a workshop."
Those are all great examples. And I think it's helpful to know that we often use the past simple tense when talking about weekend activities, since we're talking about completed actions in the past.
Exactly. So we'd say, "I went to the movies," not "I have gone to the movies," when we're talking about last weekend. That's a common mistake for many learners.
That's such an important point. The past simple is really key for talking about your weekend. Let's think about some time expressions we can use to make our descriptions more specific.
Good idea. We could say, "On Saturday morning," "on Saturday afternoon," "on Saturday evening," "on Sunday," "over the weekend," or "last weekend."
Those are perfect. And we can also use sequence words like first, then, next, after that, and finally to organize our description.
Exactly. Let's try to put some of this together in a sample description. Would you like to go first, Amelia?
Sure, here's how I might describe my weekend. My weekend was really nice. On Saturday, I met up with some friends for brunch. We went to that new cafe downtown. In the afternoon, I did some shopping and then went home to relax. On Sunday, I stayed home most of the day. I read a book, watched a movie, and cooked a nice dinner. It was very relaxing.
That was perfect. You used so many of the phrases and structures we talked about. It sounded really natural and fluent.
Thank you. Would you like to share your weekend, James?
Sure, here's mine. I had a pretty active weekend. On Saturday morning, I went for a long run in the park. Then I met my brother for lunch. In the evening, I went to a concert with some friends. It was amazing. On Sunday, I did some chores in the morning, but in the afternoon, I went to the beach with my family. We had a great time, though I got a bit sunburned.
I love how you mentioned getting sunburned. That's such a relatable detail. And you used some great expressions like, had a pretty active weekend, and it was amazing.
Thanks. I think that's an important point. When you're describing your weekend, try to include some feelings or reactions. It makes your description more engaging and personal.
That's such good advice. You could say things like, it was so relaxing, I was really excited, I was a bit tired, or it was the best weekend ever.
Exactly. And let's think about some questions you might ask someone about their weekend. It's good to be able to both answer and ask questions, right?
Absolutely. Besides, how was your weekend, you could ask, what did you do over the weekend? Did you do anything special? Did you go anywhere nice? Or how did you spend your Saturday?
Those are perfect. And if someone tells you about their weekend, it's good to have some follow-up questions ready, like, oh, that sounds nice. Where did you go hiking? Or, that sounds fun. Who did you go with?
That's such an important point about conversation. It's a two-way street. Asking follow-up questions shows you're interested and helps keep the conversation going.
Exactly. And I think it's helpful to know some common weekend phrases and idioms too. They can make your English sound more natural.
Oh, good idea. What are some common weekend idioms or expressions?
Well, there's let your hair down, which means to relax and enjoy yourself freely. You could say, I really let my hair down on Saturday night.
I love that one. What else?
There's paint the town red, which means to go out and have a wild, fun time. You might say, we painted the town red for my friend's birthday.
That's such a fun expression. Any others?
There's take it easy, which means to relax. You could say, I just took it easy all weekend. And catch up on, which means to do something you haven't had time to do. You might say, I caught up on sleep over the weekend.
Those are perfect. And I think it's helpful to know that we often use phrasal verbs when talking about weekends, like hang out with friends, get together with family, stay in, or eat out.
Absolutely. Phrasal verbs are so common in everyday English, and weekend conversations are full of them.
Let's think about some different types of weekends people might have. Not everyone's weekend is the same, right?
Oh, definitely. You might have a busy weekend with lots of activities, or a quiet weekend at home. You could have a productive weekend where you get a lot done, or a lazy weekend where you don't do much.
That's so true. And sometimes you might have a weekend getaway where you go away for a short trip, or a staycation where you stay home but do fun activities as if you were on vacation.
Exactly. And it's good to be able to describe these different types of weekends. For example, I had a really productive weekend. I cleaned the whole house and finished my project.
Or we had a lovely weekend getaway to the countryside. It was so nice to get away from the city.
Those are perfect examples. And I think it's helpful to practice talking about both good weekends and not so good weekends. Not every weekend is amazing, right?
That's so true. You might say, my weekend was okay, but a bit boring, or I didn't do much, just stayed home and watched TV.
Exactly. And it's okay to admit that. Not every weekend has to be exciting. Sometimes a quiet, boring weekend is exactly what you need.
That's such a good point. Let's think about some common weekend problems or challenges people might face. That could be useful vocabulary for learners.
Good idea. You might say, the weather was terrible, so we couldn't go out. Or, I was feeling sick, so I stayed home all weekend.
Or, I had to work on the weekend, so I didn't get much rest. Or, I had too many chores to do, so I didn't have much free time.
Those are perfect examples. And it's good to know how to talk about plans for the upcoming weekend, too, not just past weekends.
Oh, that's such an important point. People often talk about their weekend plans on Thursdays or Fridays. What are some ways to do that?
Well, you'd use future tenses, of course. You might say, I'm going to visit my parents this weekend, or I'm having dinner with friends on Saturday night.
And you could ask, what are you doing this weekend? Or do you have any plans for the weekend?
Exactly. And it's good to know that we often use the present continuous for future plans in English, like, I'm meeting my sister on Saturday, rather than, I will meet my sister on Saturday.
That's such an important grammar point, and it's one that many learners find confusing, so it's great to practice it with weekend plans.
Absolutely. Let's think about some cultural differences in how people spend their weekends. That could be really interesting for our listeners.
Oh, definitely. In some cultures, weekends are primarily for family time, while in others, they might be more focused on socializing with friends or personal hobbies.
Exactly. And the concept of when the weekend is can vary too. In most Western countries, Saturday and Sunday are the weekend. But in some Muslim-majority countries, Friday and Saturday might be the weekend, with Sunday being a workday.
That's such an important point. And even within countries, weekend activities can vary based on factors like age, location, and personal interests.
Absolutely. And young people might go out more on weekend evenings, while families with children might have earlier, more family-oriented activities. City dwellers might have different options than people in rural areas.
That's so true, and I think it's great for learners to be able to talk about their own cultural weekend practices in English. It's a wonderful way to share and learn about different cultures.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting to think about how weekend activities have changed over time. Our grandparents probably had very different weekends from us, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. No internet, no streaming services, no smartphones, and probably more time for things like visiting neighbors, community activities, or outdoor pursuits.
Exactly. And I imagine household chores took more time too without modern appliances. Weekends might have been more focused on practical tasks.
That's so true. It really makes you appreciate how much things have changed. And I wonder what weekend activities will be like in the future.
That's a fascinating thought. Maybe virtual reality will change how we socialize or entertain ourselves on weekends. Or maybe there will be a backlash against technology and people will seek more authentic offline experiences.
That's so interesting to think about. And it just goes to show that language needs to be flexible and adaptable to describe new experiences and technologies.
Exactly. Language is always evolving, just like our weekend activities. And as English learners, you're part of that evolution, bringing your own experiences and perspectives to the language.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. Every learner adds something unique to the English language, and that's what makes it so rich and diverse.
Absolutely. And talking about weekends is such a perfect example of that. Everyone's is different, and everyone's is valid and interesting in its own way.
That's so true. Let's think about some more advanced vocabulary we could introduce. What about words to describe how we feel after the weekend?
Good idea. On Monday morning, you might say, I feel refreshed and ready for the week, or I'm still tired from the weekend. You could say, I had a restful weekend, or I need another weekend to recover from my weekend.
I love that last one. I definitely feel that way sometimes. And what about words to describe different types of weekend experiences?
You could describe a weekend as memorable, eventful, hectic, peaceful, disappointing, or unforgettable.
Those are perfect. And I think it's helpful to practice using adjectives to add more detail to your weekend descriptions. Instead of just, I went to the beach, you could say, I went to the beautiful sunny beach.
Exactly. And you could use adverbs too, like, I happily met my friends, or I reluctantly did my chores.
That's so true. Let's think about some more complex sentence structures we could teach. What about using different tenses to talk about your weekend?
Good point. We've mostly talked about the past simple, but you could also use the past continuous to set the scene, like, I was relaxing at home when my friend called.
That's a great example, and you could use the present perfect to talk about recent experiences, like, I've had such a relaxing weekend, or I've just gotten back from a trip.
Exactly, and you could use conditionals to talk about imaginary weekends, like, if I had more money, I would have gone away for the weekend, or if the weather had been better, we would have had a picnic.
Those are perfect examples of how to make your English more sophisticated. And what about using connectors to link your ideas?
Good idea. You could use connectors like although, however, therefore, and meanwhile to make your descriptions more complex and interesting.
Could you give us an example?
Sure. You might say, I had a busy weekend. Although I was tired, I really enjoyed all the activities. However, I'm glad to be back at work today so I can rest.
That's a great example, and I think it's helpful to point out that as you become more confident in English, you can gradually add more complexity to your weekend descriptions.
Absolutely. It's all about building on what you already know and gradually expanding your vocabulary and grammar.
Let's think about some common mistakes that learners make when talking about their weekends. That could be really helpful for our listeners.
Good question. I think a common one is using the wrong tense, like saying, I go to the cinema instead of I went to the cinema when talking about last weekend.
Oh, that's such a good point. Tense is so important when talking about past events. Another one might be using the wrong prepositions, like I was in the beach instead of I was at the beach.
Absolutely. Prepositions are so tricky in English because they often don't follow logical rules. Another common mistake is word order in questions, like what you did last weekend, instead of what did you do last weekend?
That's so true. And I think another common issue is vocabulary, using words that are too formal or too informal for the context.
Exactly, like saying, I partook in recreational activities, instead of I had fun, or I chilled with my buddies in a formal context.
Those are great examples. And I think it's important to mention that it's okay to keep things simple when you're starting out. You don't need to use complex sentences or advanced vocabulary to communicate effectively.
Absolutely. Language learning is a journey, and every step forward is progress. Even being able to say, I had a good weekend, I watched TV, is a great achievement for a beginner.
That's so true. And as you become more confident, you can gradually add more detail and complexity to your descriptions. It's all about building on what you already know.
Exactly. Let's think about some practice activities our listeners could do to improve their ability to talk about their weekends.
Good idea. Well, the obvious one is to describe your own weekend, either out loud or in writing. Start simple and gradually add more detail.
And you could also try to describe someone else's weekend, a family member, a friend, or even a fictional character. That helps you practice third-person verbs.
That's a great idea. And what about listening activities? You could watch videos or listen to podcasts where people describe their weekends and try to note down useful phrases.
Absolutely. And you could also try to imagine different types of weekends and describe them, like describe your perfect weekend or describe a terrible weekend. That helps you practice different vocabulary and expressions.
I love that idea. And you could also try to compare your weekend now with how you used to spend your weekends or how you'd like to spend them. That's great practice for using past and future tenses.
Exactly. And for more advanced learners, you could try to write a short story or a blog post about a memorable weekend. That's a great way to practice descriptive language and narrative tenses.
Those are all fantastic suggestions. I think the key is to make it relevant and personal to you. If you're talking about something that matters to you, you'll be more motivated to learn the language to express it.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn and improve. That's how we all learn, isn't it?
That's so true. I think it's helpful to remember that even native speakers make mistakes sometimes. Language is messy and imperfect, and that's okay.
Exactly. The goal is communication, not perfection. As long as people can understand what you're trying to say, you're succeeding.
That's such an important perspective. Let's think about some different contexts where you might need to talk about your weekend. It's not just with friends, right?
Oh, definitely. You might talk about your weekend with colleagues at work on Monday morning, with your English teacher or classmates, or even in a job interview.
That's such a good point. And the way you talk about your weekend might change depending on the context. With friends, you might use more informal language, while in a job interview, you'd probably be more formal.
Exactly. And in some contexts, you might want to highlight certain aspects of your weekend. In a job interview, for example, you might emphasize activities that show positive traits, like I volunteered at a local charity or I took a professional development course.
That's such an important point about context. It's not just about what you say, but how you say it and what you choose to emphasize.
Absolutely. And I think it's helpful to practice talking about your weekend in different contexts so you're prepared for whatever situation comes up.
That's so true. Let's think about some strategies for learners who feel shy or embarrassed about speaking English, especially when talking about personal things like their weekend.
Good question. I think it helps to prepare a little in advance. You could think about a few things you did over the weekend and how you might describe them in English.
That's such a good idea, and it might help to write down some key vocabulary or phrases you want to use. Not a full script, but just some notes to help you remember.
Exactly. And I think it's also helpful to remember that most people are interested and supportive, not critical. They want to hear about your weekend and connect with you.
That's so true. And the more you practice, the more confident you'll become. It's like any skill. It gets easier with time and practice.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to celebrate small victories. If you successfully have a short conversation about your weekend in English, that's something to be proud of.
That's such an encouraging perspective. Every conversation, no matter how short, is a step forward in your language learning journey.
Exactly. And remember, making mistakes is a normal part of learning. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn and improve.
That's so true. Well, James, we've covered so much ground today, from basic vocabulary to advanced structures, from cultural differences to learning strategies.
We really have, and I hope our listeners have found it helpful and inspiring. Remember, talking about your weekend is such a practical and useful skill in English.
Absolutely, and it's a great way to connect with people and share your experiences. Everyone has a weekend, so it's a topic that connects us all.
Exactly, so keep practicing, keep learning, and don't be afraid to share your weekend experiences with others in English.
That's perfect advice. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us on Learning English Studio.
Yes, thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into talking about your weekend in English. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our podcast if you found it helpful.
We'll be back next week with another useful topic for English learners. Until then, keep practicing and have wonderful weekends.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.